The year is 1888. The city is London.
But not the London of grand palaces and bustling boulevards. This is the East End, the squalid, grimy heart of Whitechapel. A place of overcrowded tenements, gaslit alleys, and gin palaces that offer a desperate escape from the cold reality of poverty. And in this world of shadows, a monster was born, a name whispered in hushed tones, a spectre haunting the fog-laden streets, Jack the Ripper. For over a century, his name has been synonymous with unsolved murder. But the real mystery isn't just who he was, it's why he was never caught. How did this seemingly ordinary killer slip through the fingers of the most powerful police force in the world, leaving behind a trail of blood and a legend that refuses to die? To answer that, we must return to the terrifying autumn of 1888. Chapter 1. It began with a name, Mary Ann Nichols, known as Polly. On a cold August morning, her body was found, throat cut, stomach mutilated. A brutal death in the shadows of Whitechapel. The newspapers called it a murder, but no one realized this was the beginning of something far more sinister. Just a week later, Annie Chapman was found, then Elizabeth Stride, then Catherine Eddowes, and finally the most horrific case of all, Mary Jane Kelly, discovered in her own room, mutilated beyond recognition. These women were not faceless victims. They had lives, families, hopes. They were mothers, daughters, wives, struggling to survive in a brutal city. And all their lives ended in the same way, by the hand of Jack the Ripper. Each crime was more savage than the last. The precision of the cut suggested someone who understood anatomy. Perhaps a butcher, perhaps a surgeon. Whoever he was learning, perfecting his art of death. Whitechapel had never seen horror like this before, and the city was about to drown in fear. Chapter 2. Letters from Hell. Historians usually speak of the canonical 5 victims. The 5 murders almost all experts agree were committed by Jack the Ripper. But the autumn of 1888 was soaked in blood. Some believe the Ripper may have killed 7 or even 11 women. Among them, Martha Tabram and Frances Coles are often debated as possible victims. The truth, we may never know. As the body count rose, the police were desperate. And then, the letters began to arrive. The first came to a news agency. It read,
"Dear boss, I keep on hearing that the police have caught me, but they will not catch me just yet. I am down on prostitutes, and I will not stop ripping them until I do get caught. The last job was a lot of fun. I gave the lady no time to scream. How can they catch me now? I love my work, and I want to start again. You will soon hear of me, and of my funny little games. I saved some of the red stuff in a bottle. It was the blood from one of my victims, but it turned thick like glue, and I cannot use it to write with. The next job I do, I will clip the lady's ears off, and I will send them to the police just for fun. Keep this letter safe until I do a bit more work. Then give it out to the public. My knife is so sharp, I want to use it right away. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper."
And just like that, the killer had a name, a brand. The newspapers seized it, splashing it across every headline. The public was hooked. The legend was born. More letters followed. Some mocked the police. Some dripped with grotesque humor. One even came with half a human kidney, supposedly taken from a victim. Were these letters truly from the Ripper, or hoaxes written by journalists hungry for sales? Nobody knows, but the effect was devastating. The killer wasn't just a man anymore. He was a phantom, a ghost story fed by the press, terrorizing London every time ink touched paper. Chapter 3. A Comedy of Errors. You might expect Scotland Yard to swoop in like a well-oiled machine. The reality was messier and more human than any detective novel could make believable. First, the tools simply did not exist. There was no fingerprint database, no blood analysis, no way to link a small clue on one street to a suspect seen on another. Crime scene science was in its infancy. Photographs were grainy, often taken hours later, and crime scenes were swamped by gawkers before a single official could cordon them off. Witness testimony, the thing Victorian detectives relied on, was a tragedy here. Frightened, unreliable, and often contradictory. People remembered shapes, not faces. They remembered a hat, not the man beneath it. Then there was the territorial problem. Whitechapel sat on the edge of two jurisdictions, the Metropolitan Police and the City of London. And those two forces did not always play nice. Rivalries bred secrecy. Reports were filed twice, sometimes not at all. Leads that should have been shared were hoarded like trophies, and precious minutes were lost in petty bureaucracy. One crucial example, after the murder of Catherine Eddowes, chalk graffiti, the infamous Boylston Street graffito, was found near a dropped cloth. Some thought it could have been a clue. Some thought it would spark riots. An officer, terrified of inflaming anti-Jewish violence in an already volatile district, ordered the writing erased before anyone photographed it properly. Evidence or mere vandalism was wiped away under a panic that showed how fragile London really was. The press made things worse. Penny papers fed hysteria and then fed on it, printing rumors as facts and hoax letters as confessions. Every false lead was headline news. Detectives were hounded by editors and politicians demanding quick answers. The public wanted a monster behind bars, not a messy, uncertain truth. Add to that the endless parade of false confessions and hoaxes. Men who wanted notoriety, women who lied from fear, pranksters who mailed taunting notes, and investigators were drowning in noise. So the investigation became a tragic circus. Too many performers, too many scripts, and no director with a clear view of the stage. The truth is simple and bitter. The system that was supposed to protect Whitechapel was overwhelmed by fear, by its own shortcomings, and by the relentless appetite of a sensational press. Chapter 4: A Gallery of Ghosts. Over the decades, Jack the Ripper has had more suspects than perhaps any killer in history. More than 100 names have been suggested: doctors, butchers, painters, lawyers, even royalty. The truth is, without DNA, they remain just that, names. But some suspects have fascinated investigators for over a century. Take Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jewish immigrant barber who lived in Whitechapel. He suffered from mental illness, and some accounts say he had a violent hatred of women. Police considered him a prime suspect, even placing him under surveillance. In modern times, a study claimed DNA from a victim's shawl pointed to him. But critics argue the evidence is too contaminated to be trusted. So Kosminski remains both the closest and the most controversial candidate. Then there is Montague John Druitt, a well-educated barrister and schoolteacher. Weeks after the final Ripper murder, he drowned himself in the River Thames. Some Scotland Yard officials believe the killing stopped because Druitt was dead. Another theory points to Francis Tumblety, an eccentric American quack doctor. He was flamboyant, openly misogynistic, and under arrest for other charges at the time of the murders. When suspicion grew, he fled back to the United States. And then, more modern theories emerged, like the one naming painter Walter Sickert. Author Patricia Cornwell spent a fortune buying his paintings and letters, convinced his art concealed dark secrets of the Ripper crimes. But again, proof never materialized. The list goes on: surgeons, aristocrats, even whispers of a royal conspiracy. But none can be tied to the murders beyond doubt. That is the tragedy of the Ripper case. Every suspect is both possible and impossible. Every theory opens one door, only to slam another shut. Chapter 5: Why He Was Never Caught. Why did Jack the Ripper escape justice? The answer lies not only in police mistakes, but in the world he lived in. First, technology had not yet caught up with crime. There were no fingerprints, no DNA testing, no chemical analysis of blood. Investigators in 1888 were fighting a modern monster with medieval tools. Second, Whitechapel itself was the perfect hiding place. Tens of thousands crowded into its alleys and tenements. Desperation, poverty, and crime blurred every face into anonymity. The killer could melt into the crowd and vanish like smoke. Third, Jack may have simply disappeared. After Mary Jane Kelly, the killings stopped. Some believe he died. Others think he was imprisoned for an unrelated crime. Still others argue he boarded a ship and carried his darkness abroad. And finally, there was the legend. Jack the Ripper was not just a killer. He was a story, fed by newspapers, exaggerated by rumor, immortalized by fear. A man can be caught. A myth cannot. In the end, the Ripper escaped because the world of 1888 allowed him to. Because the darkness of Whitechapel was bigger than the men trying to light it. And because some monsters live longer in imagination than they ever did in flesh. Final chapter. Jack the Ripper did not vanish with the fog of 1888. He endured, not as a man, but as a legend. For more than a century, his name has haunted our imagination. From Victorian penny dreadfuls to Hollywood thrillers, he became the blueprint for the faceless killer, a shadow larger than life. He was more than a murderer. He was the first media-made monster, a celebrity criminal born from fear, rumor, and ink on paper. If Jack the Ripper had been caught, he might have been just another criminal. But because he disappeared, he became a ghost story that never dies. His legacy is not only in the bodies he left behind, but in what he represents. The fear of walking alone at night, the failure of a system meant to protect, the darkness that thrives when poverty and indifference collide. That is why we still speak his name. Because Jack the Ripper was never just a man. He was, and still is, the shadow of Whitechapel, the whisper in the fog, the fear that never needed a face.